All right, Rob Browne here with Ronnie Sanders. Doug Dean Scarborough is off today. Deep meditation to get ready for media days. And so it's going to be the three of us today and our executive producer, Brendan Martin. Guys, I went to the bookstore when I was out driving around. I was taking some warm goat's milk to Mildred, and I found these at Barnes & Noble bookstore. And
yes.
You know who I saw in there perusing these magazines when I was there? Mildred. And she had bought several copies. And
Mildred's still upright.
She is, and she was recently spotted in Columbanner. Can we get a spelling on that for $50? Ronnie, Doug Dean, how y'all doing?
Outstanding. Hey, what are y'all doing in 79 days and 1 hour, guys? Auburn, Baylor on a friggin' Friday night.
Leave it to Doug to get it down to the hour.
Friday Night Lights. I have this countdown app on my phone, and you got to have a pretty special event like a baby being born, which, by the way, grandson number 3 arrives this Saturday. It was supposed to be Monday. The doctor said, nope, we like Saturday better. So
God bless him. It's going to be fun, man.
I'll share the news with y'all when little William arrives.
We're looking forward to it. I'm telling you, and he'll have his Tiger or gear ready to go. Y'all,
not so much. He lives in Tuscaloosa.
That's right.
But, eventually, I'll sneak a little brainwashing in as time goes on.
Do an intervention, Hey, I want to ask both of y'all. These magazines, and I love them, and it's because I love reading things in hand, Lindy's and Athlons. I think the theme today, and I'm just going to throw it out, just kind of now, expectations for Auburn nationally versus within the Auburn fan base. And I'll start with Ronnie and then Doug, because your expectations at Auburn are always high, but after the last 5 years, I think some people are afraid to come out at night.
Well, I think that, nationally Auburn's getting a little bit more, publicity than normal or than over the last 5 years. I think Auburn fan expectations are higher than national media expectations. But Auburn people follow it closer, and they're also wearing orange and blue glasses, right? But, I think that talking to people around the program, they feel like they can get to 9, and they feel like that's, where they want to be, headed in the right direction. So you have a couple of things fall your way. Maybe you get to 10, but, anything below 8 or 9 is going to be tough for people to swallow, I think.
And great take, Ronnie, as always. I've noticed, and I don't disagree with what I'm going to say. This is the pulse that I've sensed from what I perceive to be the mainstream of Auburn fandom. That's always dangerous to make us, I tend to hang out and like you guys do, and in that segment that's skewed out left or right and obsesses on message boards, and we probably have some sports related mental health issues because we obsess too much. So I don't know if I'm speaking for the mainstream or not, but I think there's an inverse relationship, ironically, in the media so far. I hadn't looked at those 2 rags. Can't believe they still kill trees to print those for you, Rob. Yeah. So you can sit on the beach and actually hold it in your hands and read that type font 6 about it, every team. But you got to read the type font on Phil Steele's. Oh my God, you need a microscope, not a magnifying glass. But the inverse relationship is the media loves Auburn so far. There have been rankings that as high as 12 or 13, I believe. Yeah. Some that are down in the 20s, which I don't have a problem with. Auburn, I think Auburn should be in the top 25 based on roster improvement. And unless there's a compelling case for, let's say, 15 other teams outside the top 25, and there's not. This is the time. Hugh Freeze, absolutely. I know he said he needs a full 3 cycles of recruiting. Mm-hmm. Well, you're not getting one, Hugh, as far as I'm concerned. As in, you need a 3rd cycle of great recruiting to have the guns you need to contend for the playoff and possibly win a national championship. You don't need a better roster than this one, barring a rash of injuries at key positions, to win 9 games this year, Ronnie and Rob. So I think you got to, I guess you got to parse it carefully. But I think we'd be disingenuous if we didn't note that there's some frustration even with the coaches right now at the slow pace of recruiting commitments. And I think Ronnie's probably closer to this with people who would know, but I suspect with the House settlement and the fact that so much is up in the air that should be at least closer to resolved before September, how this money is going to flow through the books. I think Auburn is sitting there unwilling to roll big dice and say, well, we're just going to be reckless, and we know that we can offer this key player, a quarterback or whatever, 2 or 3 million. I think that's a little bit of a holdup, but that's easily solved when you start winning some games. And this is absolutely the proof of concept year. We're all tired of that term, but we need to embrace it. And I think, I joked about the August 29th, which is 77 days away. That is more important than the game should be. Normally, it's not a conference game. You could lose that. If you're really good, you could lose that and then run the table from there. That's not where we are. We absolutely need some wind in the sails, and I think you can get exactly that if you go just win. But if you win and look pretty good doing it against Baylor, that really helps.
Yeah, 79 days. That's what I wanted to ask Ronnie. Recruiting. Last year at this time, man, there was so much momentum. But I don't think it's just with Auburn right now. Look around the SEC at other schools. Where's the real hype train with recruiting? And there's a bit of trepidation. That's that word of the day. Our redneck word of the day is mayonnaise. Mayonnaise, a lot of people out there that don't know what's going on. But Ronnie, you and Nathan and Jason and Philip and that staff, William the intern, what's your gut feeling? Let's do a year-over-year comp.
Well, I think part of it is that the world has changed in the last few years. And now you've got the House settlement, and these kids are taking their visits, and they're going out and they're having fun. And most people have noticed, what does a commitment mean at this time of year? And I'm not sure it means a whole lot. Mm-hmm. And so, I'm not saying that every kid is making a decision based on NIL, because they're not. But that's part of it. And, these kids when you're throwing that kind of money around, things tend to happen. And I'm not as worried right now as I would be, if you get into December and it looks like this. But that being said, I also think that people are kind of waiting to see, this is year 3 and the recruiting has been pretty good. And so if Auburn comes out and has a pretty good year and looks good doing it, then recruiting becomes a lot easier. If you end up at 5 and 7, you're going to have a lot of guys walk out the door, and you're going to lose some more that you want to come in the door.
I don't know if y'all heard the news breaking, which it will work itself out. This happens when legislation gets way out over its skis, court rulings, court settlements like House, and all the devil's in the details. But goodness gracious, when the court settlement finally got in the hands of Deloitte, I'd love to see what they're making Deloitte to run this clearinghouse, wouldn't y'all?
Yes.
It's a new cottage industry, and I'm not saying they won't earn their keep doing valuations, but that's going to be legally challenged. You got to figure that when the word came out, colleges were figuring on July 1, which is soon enough. And, not enough time to report, to disclose valuation or NIL deals. And the language came out, and lo and behold, it said the day after the settlement. So that day is already passed. And they don't even have the software up at this NIL Go. That's I think the app. And one of the pundits had interviewed a bunch of players, asked every one of them, are you familiar with NIL Go, where you go online and disclose what NIL deal you've got? None of them had ever heard of it. So as Adam said to Eve, these are times of transition, Rob.
Well, another thing, surprise, there's movement in the aisles, Title IX, and I don't blame them. A lot of women, I think there's a class action suit. The over and under on the number of those, I'll put it 273. I'll take the over. And
Number
I don't blame
of lawsuits?
them. Yeah. Oh, they're already coming. And what we did, to borrow the phrase of Auburn baseball coach Butch Thompson, he talks about we kicked the anthill. That's in North Mississippi, Amory Coontail, Mississippi saying. I love that. But we've kicked an anthill. Y'all ever stepped on a bunch of fire ants? That's what we've done.
The worst is you step in it and are distracted and don't know you're standing in it.
Or you're barefooted and liquored up. You know?
Yeah. Gosh.
Well, the interesting thing is going to be, how are these funds divided? Is it based on how much each sport brings in and you divide it that way? Or is it divided evenly between men and women?
Yeah.
Well, and if I remember, Title IX, help me on this. We don't have a barrister online, but y'all know some lawyers. Title IX, constitutionally, I guess is the right reference, cannot force any particular college to actually sponsor a particular sport. They can make a university decision. We don't swim. I'm not picking on any sport. I'd love all these sports to continue to have a tradition, especially where Auburn historically has won championships and created celebrities for the Olympics, for example. Like SUNY, imagine ending women's gymnastics when we've got a gold medalist in SUNY to brag about, and I might be forgetting one in the past. But I don't think. I think what you'll see happen is the SCOTUS ruling plays out in the weirdest of unintended consequences, namely, you have a reduction in the number of women's and non-revenue sports that are sponsored, and you have an adverse impact, at least financially, on high school rising seniors who are being recruited. Because they're right now, you're going to recruit high school players to have that foundation. But if you have the money and the ability, and your program's a good draw, you have a chance to make the playoff, why wouldn't you be transfer portal heavy year to year, Ronnie?
Well, one of the reasons I think there are a couple of different ways to look at it. A lot of places want to be in the portal and heavy portal, and I don't think there's necessarily anything wrong with that. I mean, you look at Colorado, and maybe that's the best way to do it if you're Colorado. But I still think that building your roster with high school kids and having, look at Florida State, for example. Some years, what they did, you go undefeated during the regular season, and the next year you win, 2 games? That's a locker room problem. That's a culture issue. And so if you've got kids that are going to be there 3-4 years, maybe to hold things together a little bit better, then I don't think you end up with those situations. It's really, really hard to go win 12 games one year and turn around and win 2 the next.
We had interesting when Cole Kubelik spoke Monday night at the Touchdown Club in Memphis, part of the spring speaker series. I asked him about the offensive line position, what the deterioration in the quality, and Jason Caldwell has talked at length about it more than anybody. He's chronicled the decline specifically with Auburn. It began with Gus and then the unmentionable coach. And then it's getting better, but he made a great point. It's pretty common sense, but you got these guys come in for your program for spring practice. They get all the reps with the ones. They leave 2 weeks after practice because they got a better deal, or they're homesick, or their mattress was too hard. They stole all those reps. So those guys behind them, what are they going to do? He also talked about, we're hearing about Alabama's offensive line is the best in the country. Well, Caden Proctor, bless his heart, he has figured out a way to miss spring practice last year, and he missed it this spring because I think of an injury. How is he going to be developed that much better? This is the problem. That's why there's teams that can come out of nowhere. Xavier Chaplin comes to mind. And I think about, Mason Murphy from San Juan Capistrano, the Swallows from Southern Cal. Is there a chance for Auburn to make a big jump because 82 combined starts? That's huge.
Doug, go ahead.
Well, yeah, there is I guess Ole Miss is the best, not the only, but one of the best models of being really transfer portal heavy. And I'd love to have a conversation with Kiffin, maybe some staffers, head of recruiting there. Is that a lot about Lane's unique personality? That there's a fun factor to go there and get to play him, especially offensively. And he's even been, helped running backs have a chance to be 1,000-yard rushers lately. But a lot of that Ole Miss roster year in, year out continues to be portal. They come in and it's plug and play. And they seem to be, you got to give them credit for being able to evaluate players. I don't know the answer, and I don't disagree with Ronnie that the great programs that have the money or the culture to retain the high school senior who can be a big contribute as a freshman, and I think that's important, but be a big contributor only as a year later as a sophomore or a redshirt freshman. And that's why I think but I just don't know if we're in an era where you'll realistically be able to keep very many incoming high school recruits for more than about 2 years. I think many will say, man, if I'm not almost NFL ready my junior year, being taught like Calvert Falk, being talked about as a top 10 or at least a first round draft, then I'm highly motivated to transfer. And there are going to be programs that are showing up with bigger checks than Auburn is going to be able to write or whomever. So that's why I see. I don't know if y'all are noticing this, Ronnie, but there is a wave of some fans, more than I remember, who are more interested in content and writing than they are recruiting as we think about it. They still follow recruiting, but it seems like fewer of them are obsessively following. Is he a lean, a heavy lean, a flip, and so on. And I think that's a reflection of, I'm going to go through all this emotion and none of it means anything until December.
Well, for sure. And I think a lot of it is that there are so many flips and NIL money plays such a big deal. I mean, if you look at the numbers, the recruiting numbers on the stories that we do, you're right. Team content and those type of things tend to do better than recruiting stories at this time of year. And the reason is these kids are taking visits and it's also early. If you think back 10 years ago, you didn't have visits in the middle of the summer. You had visits in the fall and then after the season before the signing day changed.
Yeah.
And so I think that's part of it.
Okay. So you look at the offensive line position and you could count on one hand, probably still can, the number of true freshmen that started on the offensive line at Auburn. I mean, I remember, Pat Dye's second year out of necessity, by the end of the season, you had Steve Wallace, Randy Stokes, Ian Cowart, Jeff Hall out of Gainesville, Georgia, Hall County High School, Jeff Lott. Also remember Jeff Lott road grading people 60 yards downfield on running plays. What a beast. But I'm looking at the offensive line position now, and if Alabama has the best offensive line in the country, and you got a guy, Caden Proctor, who's missed 2 straight spring practices, he's missed a boatload of reps. You flip over here to Auburn. Let's talk about some of the names on the line, like Too Tall Miller out of Memphis. Proud of that guy. This is what's, I think, being underreported about Auburn is how much better the offensive line is. And I was told, and I heard this, that Jeff Lebby thinks that Jackson Arnold is the most talented quarterback. He's really, really likes this guy.
Please be right, Lebby.
Yeah. But when the levee breaks.
Yeah. I was reading about Oklahoma's people want, and I'm clearly portraying facts in a way with confirmation bias. I really want to confirm that Arnold is going to at least show some significant improvement. And to me, it's almost all about, can we get a significant bump in executing in the red zone? Because if you can look at Peyton Thorne had respectable production numbers last year through the air. It's just that when we in big game, and he probably padded a lot of those against directional schools, but when we got in the red zone against quality opponents is when he just didn't have it. So if you get that from Arnold, and for people to say, well, did you watch any Oklahoma games last year? Yeah, we saw it. I mean, I saw him beat Alabama and Auburn. When they played Auburn, you can give Peyton Thorne credit for one touchdown going the wrong way. Yeah. But last year, Oklahoma Sooners had the second worst wide receivers grade in the nation, second worst. And they had the 103rd worst offensive line grade. That's Pro Football Focus. So Arnold was being asked to lift a team up that had been depleted with a rash of injuries. So John Mateer will go in and they probably fix those talent issues mostly. Mateer should look great. I think Arnold should look great. And it'll be a nice test of those two when Auburn travels to Norman, Oklahoma in September.
Yeah. And
well, I also
Ronnie,
think that, play calling has got to be a part of that too. If you look at some of the play calling in certain situations last year, it was less than stellar. I think pretty much anybody would agree with that. So do you put it's kind of like I tell my kids, are we putting you in a position to be successful? And, as a coach, are you putting your players in the best position to be successful? And if you're not, then, you're certainly not getting the most out of them.
Question. I want to go back. Doug made several brilliant takes last week about it. Auburn inside the 5-yard line. I went back the other night and was watching Auburn against Kentucky and some other schools. Auburn gets inside the 5 and they're trying to throw, from the 3 or the 4. And you got Jarquez Hunter or Damari Austin out of Woodward Academy in Atlanta or Jeremiah Cobb out of Montgomery Catholic. Doug, you hit it on the head with Freeze. It's like you've got players, but you've got to get out of your comfort zone and get into the winning end zone. I mean, it's a problem.
The next play I call in fourth quarter inside the red zone will be my first.
Me too.
But you did. All three of us get the opportunity to talk to coaches who've really been around the greats at play calling and situational play calling, and it is a feel. I mean, if there were a formula that if you're on the right hash mark, inside the 25, then and it's 2nd and 7. Here's the 3 plays that have the highest probability. They get that analytics. I'm sure somebody in the press box knows that what the high probability plays are. But sometimes a coach doing what seems so counterintuitive, like you get a penalty and you got 1st and 15 inside the red zone, and they run a draw play, and the defense sometimes is not expecting it, and they bust it for a touchdown. So whatever that knack is, Hugh has had it before. I think what Hugh's going to try to do this year is get out alive at Baylor. Probably will be a little run heavy, protect his quarterback. Yeah. If you get a lead, then you can start throwing more maybe. But then you get 2 tune-up games, theoretically tune-up. You can lose any game you play if you don't show up. But I think Hugh hopes to show, because of this wide receiver room and Arnold, that Auburn can be one of those really high-octane offenses. I think you'll see – are you, Ronnie, hearing like I am that there's going to be more tempo running plays than we're used to seeing the last 2 years? I'm hearing that, and I think that can really help you with defenses.
Well, I think that if you look at last year's, I think most people are just looking for, can Jackson Arnold make good decisions? Can Hugh Freeze put him in positions where if it's an RPO, do you trust him to make those decisions? And last year, the quarterback didn't show much ability to make good decisions in those circumstances. So you're talking about play calling. I think that Kiffin is a terrific play caller. I do think he leans probably too heavy on analytics. I'm not for going for it, on your own 30-yard line in the first quarter. And some of the things that he does.
And why was it? This is a retro, and it's unfair when they play Florida. Give Florida credit on defense, but was it Kiffin's play calling, or help me, the QB last year?
DJ Lagway?
No, Ole Miss.
Oh, Jackson Dart.
Thank you. How quick we forget. Dart. Did Dart just kind of make a bad judgment, force the ball because they were behind in the game? Maybe. So it's probably a little of both. But Kiffin, he gets credit for two things can be true. Kiffin absolutely deserves credit for an elite play caller, but he also gets the footnote that in big games, you can easily find 3 or 4 head scratcher play calls, whether it's
a little bit like Spurrier. little bit like Spurrier used to be in a tight game.
Yeah. Yeah.
Against Auburn, against Florida State. I always felt like that. We had Terry Bowden on the show a couple of weeks ago for those who missed it. But you talk about getting into a rhythm and self scout and doing the things that preparation wise. You look at certain positions on the field and you look at what's the defense going to give you and all those things. But not everything can be about analytics. Like I said, Doug, you have to have a feel for the game.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's something. Okay, you go back to. Here's another example. The Joe Moore award-winning offensive line at Washington that Kalen DeBoer had against Michigan in the national championship game. And I picked Michigan. I said they're going to tear them apart. Well, two of those starters went to Ole Miss last year and hardly got on the field. It's a perfect example of you bringing these guys in and, 2 or 3 days into them being there in practice, you've got coaches over there still having to teach them some basic stuff that they should, if they'd been there for 2 or 3 years, they'd already know. That's why, Florida's defense at the end of last season with that offensive coordinator they had, Armstrong, he looked like Augustus Gloop from the original Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, young guy, big chubby face, and Ron Roberts. We still don't know who exactly called the two-man rush on the Gravedigger, 4th and 31. But I saw his
which
picture
made
in the
top
office.
25 plays list. If y'all saw that article,
of all time,
Auburn was well represented in that list. I saw that.
Three or four out of the top 25. Kick
which
six,
list was
immaculate
that?
Deflection, and I forgot the third.
ESPN story. What was the top 25 plays of the
last 25 years?
Or the top 25, last 25 years.
The best play, the best single play, and kick six naturally was number one, as it should be, and will probably never be unseated. Yeah. I can't think about it, guys. Can you conceive of just make up a play that would be wilder and more dramatic and unexpected than that? I can't conceive of
couldn't.
And more meaningful.
Yeah. You couldn't draw it up. And then
and 4th and 31 made the list. I forgot how high, and it deserves it. But thanks a lot, Ron Roberts, for trying to rush two guys.
Yeah, and here's a question. In the NFL, don't they drop 5 or 6 back right on the goal line and they rush 5? It's a standard. And again, my wife reminded me the other day, I was outside. I didn't get to go to the game at the in-laws for Thanksgiving in Clarksville, Tennessee. And she said, you said things that we still have not decoded. I was not happy. I mean, nobody was. So asking about Auburn in matchups, this first game against Baylor, Dave Aranda, what does he know about Hugh Freeze and what do we know about Baylor? Because I think in the next, we've got 79 days. So I think each week on this show, let's start breaking down, these opponents. And I know you two guys are very cerebral and well-versed. And, Baylor, it's that new stadium on the Brazos River out there. You know how much they said Robert Griffin III's Heisman Trophy brought in fundraising and exposure? $250 million plus. Because we got to sell bonds on that new stadium a few years ago.
Really?
It's a very nice stadium. But what do the Big 12, not 100 years ago, back in the late 90s, they were the big deal in college football. That's a league of better coaching than great players. But what do we know about Baylor and what's going to keep Auburn's coaches up at night other than keeping them up at night drinking Red Bull or whatever? Because that's all everybody likes to worry about the next game.
You have to start with their QB, Sawyer Robinson, that, appears to just be a gamer, and that's why I don't remember who said, it might have been Jim Dunaway that was on a show.
Yeah.
And Dunaway, I have no problem with him. He does not try to hide the fact that he's a Bama man, just like the three of us bleed orange and blue. But he's pretty fair normally. And he said the one thing he's observed of coming out of Auburn, or anybody writing about Auburn, producing content about Auburn this summer, is we're not saying nearly as much about this DJ Durkin defense, release 3.0. And I think there's some players there, especially on the back end. And so I think Durkin has a chance to get to Sawyer Robinson, cause some confusion, some problems. If Auburn can, rattle him a little early. I did see, which I think I like, Baylor for this opening game, and it's not for the national championship. It's not a big rivalry game. They're doing the blackout. Oh, the players will be wearing black. It reminds me of Georgia. Now, the difference is Georgia kicks your ass when they do a blackout. But I think when I see gimmicks like that from coaches this early in the season, I think they're whistling in the graveyard. I like Auburn in that game. You can lose that game. You go in there tight and lose the turnover margin or something weird like that. It can cause you problems, but I think Auburn's going to be too much for Baylor.
Yeah, but wearing black in the Texas heat in late August is stupid to begin with.
Friday night lights.
And number two, that's not even part of their color scheme. I mean, the smoky gray uniforms up in Knoxville, that's different. Ronnie, you've been on the sidelines and you've been there in those brain sessions till 3 a.m, getting ready for games. What is it when you look at Baylor, when you see them play, that you say, this is not what we see in the SEC, and this is what we do see routinely, if that's possible?
Well, I think one thing is, you look at Dave Aranda and he has SEC experience. And so I think that matters. He spent some time at LSU. He's a little bit of a cerebral guy. He's not a real, he's certainly not like some of the, he's certainly not Will Muschamp.
He's certainly no Coach Orgeron.
No. But he's done a good job. A couple of years ago, they were a little bit down. But he certainly flipped it, and we'll see how good they are this year. But he'll be ready. I mean, he'll have those guys ready to play for sure.
I don't think there's any doubt he will. He and Tom Herman. They both went to California Lutheran. Tom Herman, and I have this on good accord from a very reliable source, so it's not made up. When he was the coach at Texas, one of the legendary Texas high school coaches, he went by to see him to talk to about players. And he said, well, Coach, if it ain't too much before you leave, I got a list here of about 20 kids in the state that you ought to take a look at that I think would be willing to come to Austin for a trip. Put that list out there, and Herman talked and whatever, left 45 minutes later and left the list sitting on that guy's desk.
Sounds pretty lines up with a lot of things I've heard. So.
Yeah. So you start thinking about, Doug, this Auburn team. You mentioned Keldrick Falk out of Highland Home, Alabama. And you stand next to that guy. He's 6'6", 285, and he's what a 5-star looks like. He's also seems like a great kid. There's a lot of high character kids on this Auburn team. I wouldn't say it if I didn't believe it to be true. And defensive line, it all starts up front. And then you've got DeMarcus Riddick. I think this guy is a more stable version of the little ball of hate from LaGrange, Georgia, Trey Blackman. He's taller and he's wider and he can play the safety position. I think this guy's a hybrid freak athlete and a very, very high character guy.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of those guys on the team. Now, a lot of them are young, but we were talking about the last show. Freeze has done a really good job of keeping guys around that they want to keep around and building the culture. And I really do think, look, I'm not making excuses for some of the play calling in the last couple of years because there really isn't any excuse for it. That being said, I don't think that people realize the mess that he walked into. Nothing worked right in the building when he got there. And it wasn't just Harsin. It was pre-Harsin. There were all kinds of issues. Harsin obviously made things,
far worse.
Far worse. But it was a mess. And he was tasked with cleaning it up. and he's been playing with young kids and, maybe some guys that weren't as talented, but this is year 3. I think he's signed 3 consecutive top 11 or 12 classes. So, it's time. And they've hit on some kids in the portal. And so, do I expect Auburn to win a national championship? No. But I expect Auburn to be much improved.
Doug?
Yeah, and the schedule is always dangerous when you start declaring that the schedule looks favorable, because if you go back only a year ago, when we make statements like that, whoever makes it, you look at the name Vanderbilt, and there was a pretty historically valid presumption that you can put a W by that one, and all they do is sweep the state of Alabama, thanks to Pavia, Diego Pavia, and Jerry Kill. Is he still there?
Jerry Kiln explosion is still there. Yeah, he's part of the 3-headed monster.
He has been damn kryptonite for Hugh and a few others. But yeah, if teams are who we think they are, sitting here in June, and of course they're not completely who we think they are. There'll be players we are barely talking about that just explode. This time a year ago, Rob, was the name Lagway very familiar to you at all?
Yes, it was.
I mean, you knew about him, but he hadn't really he hadn't shown us what his ceiling was quite yet.
But he was the Gatorade Player of the Year in Texas.
Yeah. But as far as actual playing, lining up and playing against SEC caliber opponents, so there will be some surprises. But when I say Auburn's schedule looks favorable, Baylor, that opener's a little dicey, but if you can get past that one, if the hopes are a 9-3 regular season, it'd be great to come out of September 5-0, but it's not very likely. I think you plan and perform to try to win all 5, but you're probably going to split those 2 road games. Oklahoma, you'd love to split, maybe, and you could lose both of them because it's an SEC road game. Oklahoma and Texas A&M, and both of those should be greatly improved. And A&M was good last year. Auburn was able to beat them. That happens in Jordan-Hare. So I think when you get to October, you get a week off before Georgia comes there. And if Auburn is playing with confidence, with a week to prepare, I think that's going to be a competitive game. You'd have to favor Georgia to win it. And then from there, it gets nothing's easy in the SEC, but it gets more manageable than a year ago. I'll say that. And I think you've got a better roster to work with. Look how many freshmen guys Hugh and Durkin had no choice but to play last year, but they contributed. And they're not the sophomores this year, true sophomores. Yeah. They're not your typical sophomores. They got a lot of action a year ago, and some of them earned it. Like the Caleb Harris, he didn't play like a freshman. I think he could explode this year.
Yeah,
Doug, I think you make a great point. I mean, Auburn's schedule typically is a top 5 hardest schedule in the country. I think this year it's top 15, so it's a little bit more manageable than usual. But I also think, I look back to when I was at Florida, we were there 3 years, and we had Spurrier admittedly said, we left the cupboard a little bit bare. He left it empty. But it took us, we were playing a bunch of young kids. And so we go out 3rd year, lose to Mississippi State and get fired. A bad Mississippi State team. Ellis Johnson was the defensive coordinator. But we're playing a true freshman quarterback. And it was, we were playing a bunch of young players all over the field. We come out after we get fired that next week, and we play Georgia down to, it was a really, really close game. And then we turn around and we start stringing together some wins. Yeah. And we beat Florida State and Tallahassee for the first time in 20 years. And that's what happens when you have young kids and they're coming along. And then you fast forward, and then 2 years later, those kids won a national championship with Urban Meyer. And I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe we signed every kid, every starter except one on both sides of the ball, if I recall correctly. So it takes time. It takes a little bit but the fact that those guys have had, they got to play when they were young. They didn't sit on the bench, and that matters.
Well, you look at Auburn's roster, talent-wise, freshman and sophomore, a lot of young players with talent don't have a lot of experience, and it's just repetitions. It's getting those reps out there, but you got to have depth. And I think about, how you cannot, and unless you've played football, you understand. I remember Paul Davis and used to say, I did a story one time when I was writing for the Plainsman in college. He said, football, it's offense, defense, special teams. And Auburn had this big campaign, posters and everything. It takes special players to play special teams. And Coach Dye would always say offense, defense, kicking. You take Alex McPherson out of Fort Payne, Fort Deposit. He's out last year. And Mr. Towns Magoo, had a cannon for a leg, but he just wasn't. He struggled with accuracy. And now McPherson looks like he'll be back this year. And you got another Australian punter. You can flip the field, man, for field position with a great punter. I mean, let's talk about the special teams for Auburn. I'm so fired up talking about this stuff right now. I'm getting goosebumps. But honestly, McPherson coming back. This guy's brother is a kicker for the Bengals, I think. He's hardwired for kicking a field goal to win a game or two, a big game or two.
I just, sometimes a healthy way to look at the football programs who have historically been solid almost every year. If you think I'm speaking of kicking game at Auburn, and that a bad year was, you missed a few long field goals, or your punting hang time, your net punting average was below what you're used to. Last year was historically god awful. So in the context
that's a new
of
category.
In the context of that, I mean, you had to go back to 2008 statistically to see our kicking game that poor. And so I think the players are there. I think there will be attention to that because we're not good enough to go out and wipe the floor with 10 opponents right now. They're working on that. And there'll be some games where we unexpectedly win by going away by double digits, but you can't rely on it. So they would be very smart, and I'm sure they are, to put a heavy focus on cleaning up the kicking game. And specifically, you got to have punts that accomplish the result, which is have little or no return and flip the field. And then field goals have to be competent. You don't have to hit a 60-yarder if it's Alex or someone else, but you've got to make anything inside, let's say 48 yards. And you could say 50. They're that good. You got to make 80+% of those or pick a number. And I just think it can't be that god awful a second year in a row with the talent down at Auburn on the kicking game.
Well, and I'll give you an example. I'll go back to my time at Florida. We get there our first year, and we had 2 walk-on punters. Kicker was pretty good, but the punters were not. So we had 2 punters. They were both walk-ons, and we said, okay, whoever wins the job, we'll put them on scholarship. So, and I could be getting the order reversed here, but anyway, we go out, and I think it was first or second game, and punter that wins the job drops the snap. We put the other guy in, and he gets it blocked. And it was one thing after another. By the end of the year, we're using a backup quarterback who was a rugby style punter in high school, and special teams matters. And people talk about, who the holder is, and if you look around, and it's
long
important.
Snapper.
Well, it's the holder is the long snapper. Yeah. But the holder, if you think about it, the holder in the NFL, for almost maybe every team, is the punter. And the reason for that is the punter is with the kickers during practice. And so he's handling the ball. So if your backup quarterback is the holder, he's not catching the ball nearly as often as the punter is. And so when you get into a game, that can become an issue. Now, do you want him in there in case you want to run a fake? Maybe, but is it more important that you don't get one blocked, or you don't drop a bad snap, or something to that effect?
So it's going to be fun. I mean, Hudson Kayak or whatever, the Aussie punter from Oklahoma State, and I think there's 65 or 70 of these Aussie punters in the United States, and that's, and they play that Australian rules football, but everybody wants them. I want to ask y'all now. I want to go back and think about the possibility. You can't double team them both. Cam Coleman out of Phoenix City and Eric Singleton from Auburn's farm team in Atlanta, Georgia Tech. For football, basketball, baseball, it's become a AAA. It's what it is. But you can't double team them both. And then what if Auburn has a tight end that people have to worry about this year? I think Brandon Frazier was signed by Tuberville, but he's still with the program. Been there a while. I just, and this is just a question that came from someone in Columbiana. So what about that? How you gonna stop that?
Go ahead, Ronnie.
You cut out, Rob. I'm sorry. I didn't get the end. I didn't get the end of that question.
Yeah. I'm just saying, how are you going to double team Eric Singleton and Cam Coleman on the ends, especially if Auburn has a tight end like Brandon Frazier, an 11th year junior?
Oh, it's a matchup from hell if you're on defense. You've got to, and then if you got a pretty good running back to mix in there too, it becomes a really, really becomes a difficult thing.
We have permission in May in the summer to be a little irrationally exuberant because I'm this is not rocket surgery. We're making picks and it's okay to lean a little rosy by this or that team. But I got to see, and I'm sure y'all have seen it, I can send it to you, Eric Singleton Jr., and I could talk about Coleman. I think he's got the chance to be a superstar. And some people think Cam Coleman is going to show up and be the more celebrated wide receiver in this Auburn group. I don't think you have to be either or with them. But I got to watch Eric Singleton coming out of his breaks in practice. And it's been a long time I've seen a receiver that got me that excited that the word uncoverable kept coming because when he's hitting, if he's going to 5 yards out and they don't know if he's going left or right or continuing vertical, that is living hell on even the best cornerback that's going to try to cover him. So he's going to draw extra attention. And when you do that, you've just created a weakness somewhere else. And I think these receivers will almost automatically make Hugh a better play caller, if you know what I mean, because you can call a play that they halfway expect, but you still got to cover these elite receivers. And just when you get your mind thinking that way, they've got a bunch of other options of, wheel routes to backs, little slip screens to one of those three backs. You got Jackson Arnold that can run zone read and pull the ball down. It's going to be I think they're going to, when they get it rolling, it has a chance, barring injuries, to be really tough on defenses, even the best ones that Auburn's going to face.
And how long has it been since Auburn's actually been able to throw the ball in an offense that, certainly
just
Carson
competently, not great, just competently.
There you go, Doug.
It's been a while.
You look at Gus's, the whole time Gus was there, it was certainly an elementary passing game. Did some great things with the run game and RPO, but from a line it up and can we throw the ball? It was pretty pitiful.
It was. And okay, let's go back in history. You just talked about receiver groups. 2002, you had Anthony Mix out of Bay Minette, Devin Aromashadu out of Miami, Florida. You had Ben Obamanu out of Selma, and Courtney Taylor out of Carrollton, Alabama, or Centerville, Alabama, up near Tuscaloosa. And that was a pretty damn good group. They won a lot of games. I can't fairly compare just game by game, talent-wise. Cam Coleman, Perry Thompson, Malcolm Simmons, Bryce Kane, just those four. I looked at the pedigrees on all four of them on their sheets. Malcolm Simmons is the one that jumped out at me because Doug just goes through Alex City so much on the way to Lake Martin, Benjamin Russell High School.
There's another receiver too that Auburn wants.
Yeah, and Doug and I were talking about that, and Doug just kept going back to that guy. And Doug, I've sat out there at Lake Martin with Doug drinking a Hamm's beer or 2 or 3. Doug waxes eloquent about these guys. Track and field, I think, is your insurance policy for every sport you play. I think Malcolm Simmons can be dynamite in the return game.
He's gonna. It's odd to say it, but Simmons, with all of his top end speed,
Yeah.
you got to believe he's getting some coaching, and he'll be a better route runner. And he wasn't bad as a freshman, but nobody's talking about Malcolm Simmons. So there's going to be some four vertical pass patterns,
Yep.
and the defense, they can't help themselves. They're going to be thinking of Coleman and Singleton, and look out. I mean, you're going to have a slower safety trying to stay with Simmons. And if you can give Arnold time or roll the pocket, I mean, it's going to be fun to see. We've been critical, rightly so, of Hughes' play calling last year, but he's going to have a lot of options. It doesn't mean the playbook is better by having more plays, but he's got plays that when they run them now, we will have a matchup advantage.
Ronnie, again, let's pick into you. You've had the headsets on before. You've heard what's said in between plays. I got to ask you now about Bryce Kane. He's the smallest of those four out of Baker High School in Mobile. And I applaud Hugh Freeze for recruiting so heavily in state.
Absolutely.
And because those kids, they can't quit. They can't. I mean, they can't go back to Mobile, back to Foley and say, man, what happened? Because that's what they'll hear the rest of their lives. What are we going to do with it's not an embarrassment of riches until it is, but there's a lot of talent there. How do you get them all enough catches, if that's even possible?
Well, you got to be creative, and you've got to find out, what each guy can do. If you've got a smaller guy, then, it's like if you remember Markeith Cooper, who played at Auburn when I was there, and Jimbo Fisher was like, hey, he's like, you can have one of those guys on your team. You can't have three, and so a lizard, as we called him, could do some things. We could do a lot of things with him, but you didn't want to hand it to him and let him go up the middle. That was not his strong suit. So you got to do what your players can do, and you got to find ways to use them that'll help you.
Yeah. Markeith Cooper was out of Liberty City, man. That kid was tough. He talked about, how'd you get so fast? He said, man, in my neighborhood, you went to the grocery store, you were running for your life. And he was just a tough ass player, what I call a tap. Another Butchism, get mad, make a difference. And I just look at here. I'm curious before we wrap up, little history here. Great defenses. Auburn's had some great ones. And Doug hit on it. DJ Durkin, and he's tapping into that pipeline at St. Francis Catholic Academy up there in the Baltimore area. It's only about 200 students. I think DJ Durkin is way undervalued as a defensive coordinator. And I think the longer he's at Auburn, you're in year 2?
Mm-hmm.
And so the terminology, the phrases, all the stuff, the guys are going to start reacting instead of having to pause and think. Agree or disagree?
I like what you're saying, because think about it. And this sort of buttresses Dunaway's point that why aren't we talking about Auburn's defense? Because you can lose some games on defense by just getting burned on plays. But if you look at big games, almost always still in the SEC, some of these games might be 48 to 45 scores. But usually the team that wins these tough games, you can point to 6 or 8 big defensive stops or turnovers. So in that sense, you win with defense. You don't win with defense by winning 10-7 anymore. I mean, it can happen, but it's very rare. But what if, just as we've all talked about Hugh needing 2 years, and Hugh would rather have 3 to get things really going in terms of talent, what if Durkin also needed a 3rd year for it to finally show us what Durkin's true capabilities? We've seen that he can dial up a good defense. Now, most of us, including DJ Durkin, I'm sure, is scratching heads about why can't you stop a 3rd and 15? What's going on with 3rd and long getting burned so many times? They can fix that. I mean, those, and you're still going to get smoked by some team that just makes a play. But if Auburn's defense makes a pretty big step and offense goes from pretty bad at times to competent, if not elite in some games, then it's not stupid to talk about winning 9 games. Do you agree, Ronnie?
Oh, yeah.
I agree 100%. And I think people forget DJ Durkin is a Muschamp guy. And Auburn people, at least the ones I talk to, think a lot of people Muschamp. And, Will says really, really good things about him, loves him, thinks he's a terrific person and a great coach. And I think he's proven that. He certainly fits at Auburn.
Yeah, we just got a couple of minutes before we wrap up, but next week, obviously, we'll spend a cursory amount of time on Ball State, the Cardinals. We'll remind everyone that's where David Letterman, the last funny late night TV show host, graduated from. Yes, it was Ball State in Muncie, Indiana. We've all been to Muncie, I think, but I think the takeaway today is it's that 9 and 10. Boy, you want to get into double digits because then there's an air of confidence. And I'm curious if I know William Halliday, the intern, is listening and watching right now. Love this kid. Season ticket sales for Auburn. I wish I don't know what they are right now, but that's the canary in the coal mine. You want to have 30 to 40,000 people on the waiting list. Y'all heard anything?
I have not dug into that, but I know when I called to renew mine, I was left with the impression that they were going quickly. So
remember the days when Mr.
Well, you got Georgia and Alabama. Sorry if I
Yeah.
walked on your. You got Georgia and Alabama coming to Lee County.
Yeah.
That's going to sell tickets. But if you're having a longer term discussion about what's going to happen with fan engagement and the usual sources of revenue, I see some troubled waters ahead, and they're going to have to be every program. It's not an Auburn problem. It's a college football and cultural problem. Going to have to be creative about keeping people coming on game day.
Just remember, go back 20 years ago, those tents being set up for the game day experience and stuff for the kids. That's right. But you know what? We are 79 days away from Auburn's first game against Baylor. And, as we get closer, all that other stuff goes out the window, and it's about blocking, tackling, and special teams. So it will be great. Hey, for executive producer extraordinaire Brendan Martin, this great channel here, SEC Sideline Sports Network, what a privilege, man, to get to be on here and talk about your own school. And I love all 16 of these SEC schools. This one, I even can wear a visor. But awesome stuff today. And next week, you know what? One of these days, we're going to get somebody from Columbiana on here and get her thoughts on college. I heard she drives a 1979 AMC Pacer and 4-ball tires.
Guys, it's always good to connect. We're in a little bit of the slow season, but that's going to change momentarily.
There's nothing slow with this crowd right here.
Y'all have a good evening, guys.
Good night, everybody. Good night, John Boy.